Welcome to the fourth of four writer education series focused on writing for the screen, big and small. Part 4 is the rewrite. Now you've written your script, created your Bible, so now what? And our instructor for all four of these sessions has been Greg Elliot, who is a screenwriter, writer, and editor in California. Anything else, Greg, I should add, or shall we turn it over to you?
No, that's fine. A quick note to our sponsors. We might run a tad long. I mentioned to Jim when I went over this material, it ran a little over an hour, and I was cutting some stuff out. And then I thought, no, I'm going to leave this stuff in. So we might run 5 minutes over. Anyway, so if you've been following these webinars, then you have the information you need to create your pilot or your screenplay and the Bible that accompanies it. And it's not likely that many of you have got that much finished quite yet. But today we're going to talk about the next step, what the next step will be. And for those of you who have finished a draft, this will fit right in. And that's what do you do now that you have your finished script and your accompanying Bible? In other words, how do you tackle the rewrite? First, let's be a bit more clear about how to finish that first draft. There are two schools. Actually, there are tons of schools, but we're going to talk about the two that are most common. The first is write. Don't look back. Don't make changes. Time for that later. Just get to the end, then work on your rewrite. A lot of writing gurus advocate this method, not only when writing scripts, but when writing just about anything longer than a grocery list. Short stories, novels, nonfiction, you get the idea. But that other school of how to rewrite is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And in this version, as you write your script and your Bible, as you learn more about your story, about your characters, about what you really want to say and how you want to say it, you go back and start adjusting things, shifting things, moving things around a bit, as you at the same time continuing to write forward toward the end. And this version 2, this is the most common way that we do things in Hollywood. When you're working on a show, when you're working on a TV show, you first create a beat sheet, and we've gone over all this in the previous, but sometimes you do that alone, sometimes you do that with other staff, and then your head writer tears that to pieces and gives the notes back to you, and you do it over. But at the same time you're doing that over, you're creating your outline, and you hand that to your head writer, and he or she tears that apart and hands it back to you, and you're creating your first draft, and then you're creating the second draft, and you're never taking the beat sheet back to show the changes. You're never taking the outline back to show the changes. You're never taking that first draft back to show the changes. You are making those changes in that draft as you are moving forward. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that, for Hollywood, is one of the ways. Hollywood television, even more often than the movies, is on a deadline. You've got, I hesitate to say back in my day, but you've got a certain amount of time to get in a certain amount of episodes for this season. It's usually, by the way, when I was writing, it was 6 weeks from that first beat sheet to that final second draft. It's 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks for the outline, 2 weeks for the first draft, 2 weeks for the second draft. Boom, you're done. And that 2 steps forward, 1 step back process has. If there were a more efficient way to do this, television would have discovered it. They would have found it. We've been making television for 80 years now. And if there were a better way to do it, somebody would have come up with it. So, by the way, you can use that method, either write and never look back, or you can use that in novels and short stories, in any kind of writing. It's a process that's not specifically for screenwriting, but that's what we're talking about today. Okay. In order to get to the end of the first draft and to get something you want, at some point, you're going to sit down and say, okay, I'm ready to do a rewrite. And here is where Hollywood may surprise you. Again, that approach that is most commonly taken with screenplays and with television, especially with television, might not seem the most logical, but it is to break the process into pieces. Um, and you examine these parts one by one, and the parts are your world and your tone, and perhaps your theme, your plotting, your characters, extending tension and increasing conflict, your pacing, the arcs of your story, your action lines, and finally, your dialogue. And we leave dialogue to last because it's the most malleable. It's likely the most changeable, and it's likely the most to be influenced by those other changes you're making. So there is there's a certain logic in the order in which we do this, starting with world and tone and ending with dialogue that again makes the most efficient and seems to lead from one to the other. You could, by the way, you could also this approach, taking the pieces apart, could be applied to a novel or a short story, but that would be a little harder to do because of the way a script is formatted. Dialogue is its own line. Each character name is on its own line. You can literally tell your screenplay software, if Fred is one of your characters, show me all of Fred's lines, and you can go through just Fred's dialogue. So this process of looking at this piece by piece, or just show me the action lines, or just show me if you're writing acts in the industry, they're called act outs. If you're writing the end of your acts because you're writing for somewhere that has commercial breaks, you can say, just show me the act outs. And that's a process. That's an option you don't have in a novel, although you can do a global, show me every time Fred shows up. So you can, there's some ways to do this that are not quite as easy. Anyway, this is as good a place as any to discuss the writer's Hippocratic Oath, which is, first, do no harm. Another way to say that for writers doing a rewrite, don't fix what ain't broke. There is a tendency, especially with newer writers, to try to do too much with a rewrite, to try to change too much with a rewrite. You are not necessarily, we're going to come back to this point probably more than once today, trust your instincts. Your instincts for your storytelling are most of the time pretty good. Trust them. You're not necessarily changing your plot. You're not necessarily changing your characters. You are sharpening them in this process that we're about to go through. And we're going to touch on each of those things I mentioned one by one as we go through here today. Okay. By the way, if you're using that two steps forward approach, you've likely written and reworked parts of your draft already. And I'm just going to mention this thing that happens often enough with writers that it probably deserves a mention, which is when you get tired of your own story. It is so common, it has a name. The name is writer's fatigue, not to be confused with writer's block. Writer's block is when you can't figure out what you want to write next. Writer's fatigue is when you start saying, this whole thing sucks. I'm going to take it out and put it on a barbecue and, it sucks. First of all, be aware that that's common, that happens to a lot of writers. And be ready to do battle with it. The two most common ways to defeat writer's fatigue, put it in a drawer, come back and look at it later. If you're tired of it, maybe just working on something else for a while. Or if you're on a deadline, because this happens to working writers. I was a little surprised. So we're all getting paid to do what we're doing, and we all still get sick of our own stories. So the other option is to take a minute, take a walk, take a bath, take a quiet rowboat ride, and remind yourself why, of all the story ideas, you picked this one. What is it about this story that you wanted to say? Go back there. And usually that will get that little voice that is saying, this whole thing sucks. You should just, burn it on the barbecue. That usually gets that little voice to go away. Okay. That's a mention on the way by because it is so common. All right. When you come back to that, if you have put it in a drawer for a while and worked on something else for a while, you're looking for places that don't quite work. There's a line of dialogue that doesn't quite ring true. There's the end of a scene that seems to need a little more oomph. And at the beginning of your rewriting process, don't be in a hurry to swap those things out. Just notice them. Notice that line doesn't quite work. The end of that scene needs something. It needs to be bigger. Because again, the tendency, especially when we're new at this, the tendency is to go in there and fix it right now. And here's the better option. Wait. There have been lines in my scripts that bothered me for 5, 6, 7 reads through. And there's something about I've learned by now, what I'm waiting for is the inspiration for something that's better. I'm not putting in something that's different. I'm waiting until I know what's better. So don't be in a hurry. Just notice on the way by, on the read through, notice what seems to bump you, what doesn't quite work for you. Just notice and make a note, and we'll come back. And when you get out either that chisel or that hammer or whatever you're using, you will be better able to make sure that the changes you're making are making your script better, because that's the whole point. And until you know that, don't be in a hurry to make any changes. Okay, let's look at those parts one at a time. The first is your world and your tone and maybe your theme. And we've talked about theme before, but I'll mention it again. Where does your story take place? Is it modern day? Is it in the past? Is it in the future? We have on television and in the movies examples of all of these right now, if you stop and think about them for a minute. How in your first draft have you shown us these things? And how can you improve on them? It's likely by the time you get to the end of your first draft, you know more about your setting, regardless of what it is. So go over it again. Where can you better show us that world? Where can you show us that world with more clarity? Where can you add a detail or mention something sooner? Or again, the image that you had at the beginning of writing your first draft has kind of sharpened on its own. By the time you get to the end, you know more about where we are and what we're doing and what we are. Where can you begin to salt those things in? Let's look at tone for a second. Every script has a tone. A dark subject going to prison, told with a light touch, that's Orange is the New Black. A fond look at our past with a nostalgic, if ironic feel, that's Mad Men. An apocalyptic world where death is expected every week, that's either Game of Thrones or Walking Dead or House of the Dragon, or take a number of them. What is your tone? And how are you expressing that tone? When you step back and you look at your first draft, and just as important as what is the tone and how are you expressing it, where are you expressing it? Where are you showing us the humor? Where are you showing us the horror? Where are you showing us the imminent danger, the threat? Where are the elements that show us what your tone is? First of all, you have to know what that tone is. I'm writing a horror story with humor. That's a tone. And then you have to act on that. And again, if you've created your Bible can probably help you through this process. What have you said about the way you want to express your tone in your Bible that can then guide you and help you to find out where you were putting that, or where you were re-putting that, or where you were sharpening that in your draft. Okay, your theme. As we've discussed last time we met, I believe, theme tends to sneak up on you. Another way to express theme is to ask the question, what's my story really about? And you may not have a full understanding of that until you get to the end. For me, it's like it's peeling back an onion, layer by layer by layer by layer. It's, oh, this is what I'm really trying to say. That might not be, on some level, that. Your subconscious knows that, but it might take a while to come to the surface. So notice, again, back to that one of those driving ways that we rewrite. Notice what's my story really about, and where am I expressing that? That's your thing. Okay. Okay, let's look at your plot. You may have more than one, by the way. Some pilots, many screenplays have B and C stories along with the A story. So you may have more than one plot that you're looking at. But regardless of whether you have an A or a C or a B story, what we're talking about is how do you sharpen them? How do you sharpen your plot? So the first question, what's the primary story that drives the action of my script? For each of you, what's the most important plot thread in your pilot or your screenplay? And when you finished your draft and you're beginning your rewrite, step back. And again, this is a lot of forest for the trees. When are you stepping back and looking at the whole? And when are you driving forward and looking at a line of dialogue or a line of action? And in a rewrite process, you're going to be doing both. You're going to step back and look at the whole, and then you're going to dive in and change a line or a scene. And you just get used to the fact that you're going to be doing a lot of that leaning back and leaning forward as you go through. So what is that plot thread? In a pilot, in the first hour, usually an hour, in the first hour of your series, the question that you need to ask at the end is, how does this launch my series? How does the plot, right now we're talking about plot, there are other things we'll talk about today as well, but how does the plot ending launch my series? Because that's one of the biggest differences between a screenplay and a pilot. The screenplay comes to the end and you've told the end of a story, unless you're, deliberately setting up for a sequel. You've come to the end of the story. But in a pilot, you're doing the opposite. You're starting a series. And what is it about your plot? In this case, we'll talk about characters later, etc. But what is it about your plot? What is it about your pilot that launches this series rather than comes to the end? Okay. Other things to look at in that forest trees thing, other things to look at in your plotting. Make sure that each scene drives your story forward. If you find a scene where they're sitting around and talking about grandma's cookies and it really has nothing to do with the plot, that doesn't mean you need to cut that scene. That scene may be imbuing us with more about the characters, for example. But you should probably find a way to add something about the plot. In other words, we're going to talk about pacing in a bit because that's one of the things on the list. And right now we're talking about plot, but those two are, all of this is combined, of course. But the idea here is you want to make sure that scene about grandma's cookies isn't a lull, isn't more of a little respite from all the exciting action than you want. Because respites are good from time to time, but again, even those scenes should be moving your story forward. Every single scene should be moving your story forward. So if, when you sit back and look at it and you're working on your rewrite, you find a scene that's just about grandma's cookies and nothing else, where can your characters, for example, compare grandma's cookies, the way grandma made cookies, to the way they're trying to solve this case, whatever it is? Anything at all like that brings the two back together and keeps the story moving is what you're looking for. Okay. Moving on to your characters. How do you make your characters come across as living, breathing people? A lot of this work you've already done if you've created your Bible. You know who's loved who since kindergarten. You know who was the head of who was the hero in the last football game of high school. You know who has hated who since they took the job away. You know all the details for how these people are going to react and how they feel about each other. And all of that work, most of which is in your Bible, is going to influence how you write these characters and is going to help make them better living, breathing people on the page. Now, in your rewrite, how do you sharpen those things? A couple of things to remember. Don't make your characters the mouthpiece for what you need them to say to move the plot forward. That is, on one level, of course, what you're doing. But what you want to think about as you look at your rewrite, what you want to think about is the characters. What do they want? Every single character in every single scene wants something. We're going to come back to that in a second too. So one of the things you can do on your rewrite, especially on a day when, uh, you're kind of not necessarily in the mood to do any serious work, you can sit down and go through scene by scene. Let's say it's Fred and Ginger are in this scene. And you say, okay, what does Fred want in this scene? What does Ginger want in this scene? The fact that they want different things is good, because tension is when your characters want different things, and we'll get to that in a second too. But know what they want. And then ask yourself, what are they doing? What are they saying in order to get that? Because here's what you don't want. You don't want to have them say something or do something because that moves your plot forward. You want them to say what they say and do what they do because of what they want, what they're trying to find, what they're trying to hide, what they're trying to discover, who they're trying to get to know better, who they're trying to hide from. And you need to know that. What do they want in this scene? He wants to find out who stole the necklace. She wants to make sure he doesn't find out that she stole the necklace. That's an oversimplified example, but you get the idea. Know what they want and have that drive what they do and what they say, and you will have a better script. Okay. Take a look at, here's some other details. Who is your main character or characters? How soon do we meet them? If it's a while, can we meet them sooner? Because again, a theme that repeats itself over and over and again is we, your audience, live vicariously through your characters, and especially through your main characters. This is true of novels, of course, but we're talking about screenplays and television right now. What they do, what they say, what they want, what they try to achieve is important to us because we are living vicariously through them. So when your characters, so to state the obvious, we kind of need to meet the important ones reasonably soon. So when do we meet them? Take a look. And if it's a while, if there's some setup with some other characters, could we meet them sooner? Okay, how many supporting characters do you have? Here's a thing that is common in a rewrite for both screenplays and television. Can you reduce the number of supporting characters you have? Do you have two characters who are doing supporting character things, and could they be one character? And there are two reasons for this. One is your audience doesn't have to follow as many characters. Which one was Fred? Which one was, because it's fewer characters to follow. And two, and perhaps just as important, it's cheaper to hire one actor than to hire two. So if you can take two characters and blend them into one, that doesn't always work. And it isn't always something you should shoehorn. It's never anything you should shoehorn. But where you can, on your first draft, you had this supporting character do this and this supporting character do that. Could they be the same character? It's one of the questions you want to ask when you're looking at your rewrite about characters. Okay. Take a look at your characters and take a look back to the Bible. All the things you said about that character, who they are, who they love, who they hate, why they do what they do, why they're afraid of snakes, all that stuff in your Bible. Is this that person? Have you created the character you intended to create? Are they the full-blown, full-blooded person that hopefully is in your Bible? Are they that character in your script? You want to just look at that. Again, no judgment, but can you sharpen those things? Once again, you're not necessarily changing much, but where can you bring out those characteristics a little stronger? And when you introduce each character who we're going to care about, put some detail right into the script. And again, you can lift some of this straight from your Bible. If your Bible says he's 40, he's taciturn, he doesn't suffer fools lightly, and he's not easy to like, you could take that sentence maybe a tiny bit shorter and put it right into your script, and boom, we see that person. We all know people like that, right? You can take those descriptions. Oh, and by the way, another thing for the people who are reading I'm trying not to be too snarky about this, for the studio execs or their readers, and more commonly their readers who are reading your script, one of the things they look for is the more you tell us about a character, the more important that character is. so that he's 40, he's taciturn, blah, 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 blah. Consciously or unconsciously, you're going, okay, this is somebody I'm going to follow. This is a character I'm going to follow. If the waiter walks up and he's 20 and that's all you say about him or her, that also says, okay, this is not a character. This may be a character I never see again. This is not a character I pay attention to. That's just part of the how you create them on the page. Okay, and this is kind of says what we said already, but everything your characters do has to be motivated internally. What do they want? What do they need? And again, back to knowing what they want and what they need and why they are. And again, as we said before, tension is when your characters want different things. So in each scene, know what your character is doing and why. And again, back to that point of us living vicariously through your characters. Show us your leads trying their hardest to solve the case, to save the patient, to win the day. Whatever they're doing, they should be flawed. We talked about that as well. They can try things that don't work. They can try things that make things worse, but they have to keep trying. If your leads shrug their shoulders and give up and don't care, we don't care either. We at home watching or the studio execs reading, we stop caring too. Your characters, they can get discouraged, but they have got to get back up off that mat and keep trying, keep fighting. And they need to be carrying the heavy water. Your leads, your main characters need to be solving the story, not your supporting characters. You have times when the supporting characters come in and we used to call them Tommy the Explainer scenes. Somebody comes in and needs to explain what had just happened off screen or what needs to happen or what we need to do now. And you avoid those like the plague because it's just exposition on a handed to you, right? And one of the ways to avoid that is to keep your leads involved. Tommy the Explainer comes in and he's explaining something. Let your leads ask questions. Let your leads jump to conclusions. Let your leads guess where he's going and guess wrong. But keep you, in other words, your leads are not passive. They are not simply sitting and taking this information in. They are engaged in getting the information, and that makes the Tommy the Explainer scenes palatable. Let's say. Okay. Another thing about what you show us, when you show us your leads in charge, as they always should be, don't just show us what happens to them or around them or as show us their reaction, because our reaction is going to mirror their reaction. If your lead is walking toward his car and suddenly it explodes in a fireball, if he sits down on the curb and starts laughing, wow, that was close. That's an emotional reaction that tips your audience on how we should be reacting to this character and how this character takes in scenes like that. Now that might not, you could make a dozen different choices of what that character would do at that moment, but you get the idea. Show us the emotional reaction to what happens. Make sure you are showing us your character's emotional reactions, because the water cooler conversations around after, did you see last night's episode? If you're listening to those, if you're paying attention to those, if you have those with your friends, they are rarely about plot. They are about emotion, because that's what moves us most often. If you stop and think about it, and I may be ruining watching television for all of you right now, but if you stop and think about it, we aren't all that interested in the plot. Well, sometimes we are. Some shows, it's clearly both, because the plot is good as well. But the characters' emotional reactions are what sustain us as viewers, as watchers. So make sure you write those in. And if you haven't on your first draft, salt them in on your rewrite. Okay. And notice, by the way, that the more you learn about your characters, the more you learn about your story, some things may change. It may be a little more with your characters than just sharpening, and that's okay, because you know them better now. You know what their reaction would be a little more specifically now. So it's okay that they change a little, probably not a lot, but it's okay that they change a little. Oh, and cutting back for just a moment to your supporting characters, keep them alive in your story. If we meet Grandma and her cookies at the beginning of the story, and we make reference to or come back to Grandma at the end, here's what you don't want. You don't want that studio executive or whoever reading your script go, wait a minute. Who is Grandma? Do I know Grandma? You need to keep Grandma alive. So we introduce Grandma and her cookies in the beginning. We have that conversation about Grandma's cookies and how somehow that propels them to do the plot. And then at the end, when everything is happy, Grandma comes in with cookies. It's setup, payoff. We kept Grandma alive. By the way, that's also true for plot points. If you have minor plot points, you have to keep them alive as well. Okay. One more thing about your character's motivations. As I just said, you want to know what they are. You want to know why your characters do what they do. You don't necessarily need to tell us, or you certainly don't need to explain to us, but you need to know. And if they come across, often characters come across as, I would never do that, but I understand why he did, or I understand why she did, or I don't understand, but I'm interested in learning more about why she would do that. All of that works because these are living, breathing people who act like people do, which is not always the smartest, not always the best, not always the kindest. But when they're acting on what they believe, what they want, what they feel, we will feel that too. Okay. All right. Let's take a quick moment to talk about the voice of your characters. What makes one character's voice distinct from another? Most of the time, this is piece of cake because you've done that work in your Bible. You know who they are. You know how they speak. You know what their dialogue is based on their intelligence or their sophistication or their education or whatever. You know all that already. Now, when you're looking at how to sharpen that, one of the rules that works is less is more. If you got a character from the South, he or she does not need to say y'all on every sentence. If you get the idea. If you've got a character whose education is not that high, he or she does not need to say ain't in every sentence. A little goes a long way. So one of the things that I have done and continue to do on mine is pared down. If I've written a character from the South, if I've written a character who has a distinct way of talking, I go back and pare some of that back down. It doesn't need to be on every line. Again, we tend to overdo just about everything on a first draft. People say more than they need to, or actions are explained more than they need to, etc. So part of what you're doing is simply paring down so the script is lighter, so it's moving along faster. Okay, let's move on to extending tension and increasing conflict. How do you create tension that lingers, that festers? This is what you want. One of the things that seems a tiny bit counterintuitive, you do not want to resolve the tension in your script. You want it to linger. You want it to fester. And scripts do this all the time without you even noticing. Probably one of these other ways I'm going to ruin watching television for you or movies. And so hubby has come home from a hard day at work. He's changed and he's watching the game. Wife decides to do the laundry and she comes walking back with his shirt in her hand and she says, honey, why is there lipstick on your collar? Right there, you were not going to resolve that tension. You were going to break it. The phone rings. It's work. He's a fireman and there's a fire somewhere and he's got to go. And we know that that is unresolved. So the next time hubby and wife are back together, even if they're not talking about the lipstick on a collar, it's there because it is unresolved tension. Even in little ways. Somebody asks a question and the phone rings. It doesn't have to be why is there lipstick on a collar. It could be anything that needs an answer and there isn't one. Look to avoid resolving conflict. Where can these conflicts? It doesn't work all the time. Obviously, there are some things that are resolved as you're moving along in your story. People that weren't working together come together and keep working together. But if there's a little tension between them, that's almost not ever a bad thing. So look where you break tension rather than where you resolve tension. I'll give you a quick example of doing it badly from a television show that was on the air. If you guys remember Without a Trace, it was a show where, you know, we meet some guy or some man or some woman, and they're doing whatever they're doing, and they simply walk away and they fade in, they disappear. They have disappeared without a trace, and our heroes come in and try to solve where they are. In this particular case, girlfriend is doing whatever and she disappears, and they're talking to boyfriend. And they say to boyfriend, you know, they're just asking questions. When's the last time you saw her? What was she wearing? Blah, blah, blah. And at some point, he leans back and he says, do I need a lawyer? And our hero, our lead says, oh, we're not after you. And all the tension in that scene disappears. A much better choice would have been, well, as you may know, in family situations, in relationship situations, it often is the partner that's guilty. So please don't leave town. And maybe you want to get a lawyer. That would have been a better answer. But they were moving on from him and blah, blah, blah. And it's a great example of resolving tension instead of letting it linger. Okay. Obviously, one way the tension is created when your characters want different things. Another way is when a car is careening down the mountain and the brakes go out, but that's a different kind of tension. But in either case, in your rewrite, how can you increase that tension? How can you make things worse? In the case of the car careening down the hill with the brakes out, trying to, you know, the brakes have overheated and now the car is on fire, that's worse. So in the case of the emotions, you're looking for that version of the same thing. Where do your characters say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing that makes that tension, that unresolved tension, worse? Where can you sharpen that? Again, this doesn't, you're not bludgeoning these things. You're going in with a scalpel. Where can you make that just, it could be a word, it could be a phrase. It's, she is not happy with that answer kind of thing that just keeps that festering. Okay. Okay. So that's the phrase that we often ask is, where can you raise the stakes? So where can in addition to the brakes, blah, 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 blah. But here's the best way to express that. Where do we truly wonder? How is he going to get out of this? How is this going to end? How do they keep from careening off the side of that mountain? If you look back at Lord of the Rings is a great example, over and over and over. If you're reading those books or watching those movies, this is impossible. There's no way out for our heroes. How could they possibly survive this? And somehow they do. That again, both plot-wise and emotional-wise, you want your audience to be asking that question. How in the world? The brakes are out, the car is on fire. How in the world do they survive? Or, honey, are you saying you don't love me anymore? I'm not sure I ever loved you. How in the world do you ever come back from that? So both emotionally and plot-wise, where can you sharpen things? Where can you make us truly want, oh man, he is never going to get her back. After that, are you kidding me? Yeah. Or how is he ever going to get her back? Because you want him to get her back. Because he's not a bad guy. He just said an incredibly stupid thing. Okay. All right. One other tension device is ticking clocks. Ticking clocks are exactly what they said. Anytime there is a time limit, this must be done by, the obvious one is you must defuse this bomb in the next 2 minutes, and it's literally clicking down while you're figuring out which wire to cut. That's but there were a dozen other kinds. Again, looking back at examples from TV, in West Wing, CJ, the press secretary, is walking toward, she's talking with one of the other guys, and she's walking toward the press room where the press is waiting for her. And a guy walking by the other way says, you know all about RV 114, right? And she turns to the guy she's with and says, quick, tell me everything I need to know about RB 114. And they're talking she's going to walk through that door and the press is going to be right there. And he's talking as fast as he can. And it's literally a ticking clock. It's also a interesting, if they were sitting and having that conversation. Now, here's what you need about RB 14 in her office. That scene would be boring. But walking toward that office when she's already late, when we already know that she needs to get in there and start that press conference right now. That's a ticking clock. Okay, so where can you move that? Maybe they did in an earlier draft. I don't know. That conversation, they were sitting and talking, it was kind of boring, so they put it on its feet. Boom. Okay. Which leads us to pacing, because that's a good example, among other things, besides being a ticking clock, it's a good example of pacing. What is pacing? Pacing, in essence, is balancing the action with the quiet moments. So as you begin, as you sit back and look at your first draft, where are your big exciting, where is the car careening down the mountain with the brakes on fire? And where are your small scenes talking about grandma's cookies? And the larger picture is, do I have 3 careening down the road with the brakes on fire scenes in a row? Or do I have 3, let's talk about grandma's cookies, let's sit and talk about how cold it is inside, you know, and scenes are often a little more modular than you think. The order in which they happen is an arc, and we'll talk about arcs in a minute. But sometimes you can change the order for the pacing, and it'll still work. Obviously, if you know, if this happened yesterday and this happened today, and you can't swap those out, but often you can, more often than you would think, because when we used to do it all the time. And unless you're really messing up, and no, now we have scenes out of order and what day they happened, you're probably, nobody will know. Nobody but you and the writers you're working with will know that it used to be in a different order. So looking to sustain pacing throughout your script, there's a number of things you can do. What is your story race? Are there places where it lags? Are there places where you have 3 talking head scenes in a row? And can you do what they did on West Wing? I'll give you a quick example on one of my pilots. My hero was shot and he's in the hospital recovering. And people are coming in and talking to him about important stuff, but he's lying in his hospital bed. And I needed to get one of those scenes literally on its feet. And having been in the hospital recently myself, I happen to know this from personal experience. They come in and make you get up and walk. So he's getting up and walking and having a terrible time doing that. But that scene is on its feet. Not quite in the same way that the CJ scene was, but that scene is now on it. It's not 3 lying in bed scenes in a row. The middle one is I'm walking. If your characters are sitting and talking, where can they be moving? Where can they be in a car going somewhere? Where could they be on a conveyor of chocolates filling up? Where can they be doing something in addition to the conversation they're having? That's increasing your pacing. That's moving your story along, literally moving your story along. Back to CJ walking down the hall. Okay. So where can you keep those things moving forward? Other ways to make sure that your story does not lose steam. Do you have places where your characters do too much talking? Can you alter those scenes? Can you come in late and leave early? This is something we've talked about, but just to remind everybody what I mean when I say that. The things people say at the beginning of a scene. Hi, Fred. Hi, Sam. How you doing? I'm not bad. How's the wife? She's good. Listen, I came over to tell you your barn's on fire. We can skip that intro, right? And we can get to the meat. Where can you skip the beginning and we won't miss anything? Where can you skip the end and we won't miss anything? Well, we need to go interview that Mrs. McGillicuddy about her seeing the thief running out of the grocery store. And knock, knock, knock. Hello, Mrs. McGillicuddy. We'd like to come in and talk to you. Can you cut to sitting with Mrs. McGillicuddy saying, I will tell you, I thought he, where can you come in late and leave early and you will move your story along? You will lose those places that tend to lag. You will improve your pacing. Okay. Arcs. Let's talk about arcs for a minute. Again, this is a way of sitting back and looking objectively at the story you've created. We're all storytellers at heart. I believe that. We all create stories without consciously thinking about arcs or characters or plot points or much of any of that. But you do at some point want to at least check on all that and see where it can be sharpened, where it can be improved. So let's look at different kinds of arcs. Every line of dialogue has an arc. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and has an order in which it should go. And when it's out of order, it's noticeable. I'll give you an example. Hermione and the boys in the first Harry Potter are have just escaped from the three-headed dog. And Hermione turns to them and says, we should all go back to our rooms before you two do something that gets us killed, or worse, expelled. That line is funny because it's out of order. And if you're writing a comedy, you want to write out of order. But most of the time you don't. You want to write the arc, the beginning, middle, and end. Another example I'm making up is Bob and Susan have been boyfriend, girlfriend for a while, and they've been talking about moving in, and Bob's all for it. And Susan comes to him and says, I'm having second thoughts about moving in. My mom's coming to town. The baby I'm carrying isn't yours. And I don't think I love you anymore. Change that order. I don't think we should move in. I don't think I love you anymore. The baby I'm carrying isn't yours. And my mom's coming to town. If you're writing a comedy, sure. But you when the arc is out of order, it's obvious. So what is the arc of your dialogue? Your scenes have an arc. And the same point applies to every single arc we're talking about. Save the best for last. When you're I'll give you another example. There was a scene, I'm going to forget what the pilot was, but Led Zeppelin, it was a period piece. Led Zeppelin is in the scene, and Robert Plant is backstage, and he's very unhappy because his managers have, he thinks, screwed him over. And he's talking to the manager, and there are two girls giggling and simply just waiting for him to clear the stage. And he says to the manager's assistant, your boss is doing to me what I'm about to go do to those two birds sitting over there. And that's the middle of the scene. And when I read that script before it was on the air, I thought, no, that's the end of the scene. And when it aired, it was exactly that. And then he walks off. That's the end of the scene. The best line is the end. If there's anything that comes after that, you either need to move it forward, find another scene for it, or cut it, because the best line is the end. That is the arc of the scene. Your stories have arcs. If you have an A story, a B story, and a C story, one of those arcs is you're going to close, whether it's a screenplay or a pilot, you're going to close the C story first. You're going to close the B story second. You're going to close the A story. You're going to save the best, the most important for last, always. Okay. Your characters have arcs. What do they learn? Do they change? Often, our screenplay characters often do change. Our television characters change less because they're going to come back next week and they're going to pretty much need to be the same people, but they learn things and they grow. What do they learn? How do they change? Especially in a pilot when they're new, and they may change the most. Your seasons have arcs. Your series has an arc, and you need to be aware. You can change your mind later, but in your Bible, you need to be laying out what the arc is for at least your first three scenes, or your first three seasons, and you need to lay out the arc for your series overall. Because back to something I've said in previous webinars, you are not selling a pilot. You are selling the promise of a series. No studio out there is going to spend 8, 10, as much as $30 million for an hour of TV if they don't believe the series is going to go, because they're not going to spend the money. So some of this is you knowing where your series is going, and some of it is a selling point for those other people who are going to pay the money and put up everything it takes for your series to go. Okay. There is often an emotional arc in the scene. Some scenes play on the same level always. There's, people are screaming at each other for the entire scene, but often they start out making love and they end up fighting. They start out fighting and they end up making love. Often, if you're paying attention, there is an emotional arc within the scene. Where is that in your scenes? Just take a look. Okay. All right. Here's some things to think about when you're sitting back and looking at your action lines. Just some things to remember. Most of this is about making a cleaner, faster, smoother version of what you've already got. Use active verbs, not passive verbs. Avoid phrases like he is standing on the corner and he is watching the pretty blonde as she comes up to talk to him. There are too many ises in that phrase. He stands in the corner talking to the pretty blonde, skips all the ises and was. Look on your rewrite, you're probably not going to notice on the first draft, but on your rewrite, where can you replace is and was? A lamp is on the table. The table is on the wall. Where can you say that the sideboard stands against the wall? Where can, again, it's a small thing, but it's keeping your story moving. All right. No passive voice. Not she receives the file grateful. Who gives it to her? This is visual. He hands her the file is a better way to say the same thing. Don't use 10 words to say what you can say in 5. And again, this is something that you're probably paying little attention to on your first draft, but on your rewrite, can that be cleaner? Again, I think I mentioned to you, one of my pilots that had gone reasonable ways down the road at CBS, one of the notes came back because it was set in Seattle, and I love Seattle, and I lived there for a while. The note came back, too much beautiful scenery. I needed to pare that down. Okay. Tell us everything in the order that we'll see it in your action lines. Not on his way to work, he picks up his briefcase and walks out the door, kissing his wife and patting the baby on the head. That is not the order in which things are going to happen. He kisses his wife, pats the baby on the head, picks up his briefcase, and walks out the door. That's the order. Okay. Again, this is cinematic. Make every single action line cinematic. Don't tell us what we wouldn't know if we weren't watching your show on TV. In the first example, on his way to work, we don't know until he walks into that office if that's where he's going. He could be leaving the house to go see his mistress. He could be leaving the house to go to his job as a spy. He's not necessarily on his way to work. And again, the assumption in the action line is the audience knows where he's going. Don't make that assumption. Okay. Don't tell us what your characters are. Steve is angry. Sally is sad. Back to those is and are words. Steve stalks out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattle. We know that man is angry. Show us. Again, this is a great version of show, don't tell. We'll talk about a couple of others in a minute here. Again, back to how your action lines visualize for the reader what you want them to see. Show us your characters. If that cowboy walks into the bar, talks to the bartender, and there's, I don't think anybody's going to bother me, and he puts his shotgun on the table, where did the shotgun come from? When he walks, you can't hide a shotgun. When he walks in that bar, he's holding that shotgun. Show us what we need to see when we need to see it. And another example, there's a woman dressed in stunning evening wear at a fairly sleazy bar. She's sitting and chatting. She's sitting and drinking, and a guy sits next to her and starts chatting her up. Where were you tonight? It looks like you were out. Where did you get the shiner? Too late to tell us she's got a black eye. The first time we see, unless she's in profile and we don't see it and he doesn't see it, why are you here? And she turns and we see the shiner. That would work. But it's not when people talk about things that you tell us about them, the shotgun, the black eye. It's when we see them. See your script. See what we need to see. Write your action lines, or in this case, rewrite your action lines so that we see what you see. Okay. No after. After implies we missed something. After the explosion, the miners picked themselves up off the floor. Did we see that explosion? An explosion roars through the mine shaft, knocking the miners over like bowling pins. After a moment, for a long moment, nobody moves. Don't skip over. After is skipping over something. Before, by the way, is equally bad on the other end. Keep everything you do. This is cinematic. We're watching right now. Okay. Be careful of repeated words. They tend to stand out. If you use tremendous 3 pages ago, we're probably going to remember if you use it again. So be conscious of the language you use in your action lines. And don't show us details we don't need. Show us what we need to see. Okay, that brings us to dialogue, the final point here. You want to make sure each voice is distinctive. Give each character an attitude that is expressed through his or her voice, the way of speaking. We talked about that a bit. You know already because of your Bible and because of the work you've already done, you know a lot about these people. Um, uh, now, as you're doing that, surprise us. Back to that onion thing. The things your characters say, we're talking about dialogue, so we're not talking right this minute. We're talking about talking about the things they do. The things your characters say reveal things about them. Let that continue to be true through the script. You don't have to front load everything we need to know about them in the first few couple of scenes. You can tease us with some of that. You can let that play out with some of that. It keeps us interested in your characters because we're learning more new things about them. And in this case, because we're talking about dialogue, about because of the way they speak, because of the things they say. Okay. There are two things that all dialogue must do. It must tell us more about your characters. It must move your plot ahead. Not every single line needs to do both, but every single scene should do both, and be conscious of that as well. We talked about that earlier, but here's we're talking about it in the dialogue that you're writing. Again, like we were talking about with the characters, the dialogue needs to be motivated by what your characters, not what you need them to say for the plot to work out, what they feel, what they want, what they fear, what they're angry about. That drives their dialogue. We already talked about accents. One of the things we might mention is every once in a while, what your characters don't say is the single most important thing in the scene. I think we might have talked in a previous webinar about that. It's 1945. There's an 18-year-old doughboy. His uniform is so new. The creases are still all there. He's standing on a train platform and he reaches into a pocket and takes out this tiny little velvet box and opens it and looks at it and puts it back as this blonde comes toward him. And she's talking a mile a minute. And we realize that she's talking that she is getting on a train, not him. She is going to college and she's saying, you write to my mom, and until I get my dorm, I won't know where I am, blah, blah, blah. And we know what he's not saying. And what he's not saying becomes the single most important thing when she gets on that train and he watches her leave. Every once in a while, what your characters don't say is the most important thing in the scene. Okay. When I was working on Voyager, Jerry Taylor, one of the creators of Voyager, came into me about a particular scene. And for simplicity, the conversation was Captain Janeway was saying we should go left. And Chakotay, her first officer, was saying we should go right. And Jerry said to me, when Janeway says we want to go left, I want to believe her. That's what we should do. And when Chakotay says we should go right, I want to believe him. That's what we should do. And I want to not know who's going to win this argument until the end. And that taught me a lot about every rare once in a while, one of your characters is bulldozing right over the top of another. But more often, what you want to create in your dialogue is a great tennis match. Either one of these players who are evenly matched could win any point. And you don't know who's going to win the game, who's going to win the match until the end. That keeps us on the edge of our seat. And even in that wasn't a crucial scene, but in every scene, who is going to win this? If you consider every dialogue, because people want different things in argument, who's going to win this argument? Who's going to win the next argument? And if they're both well thought out, well spoken, why should one win the other? That uncertainty makes your audience pay more attention. And that more often than the bulldoze is the way you want to go. Write what you hear. Detail is important. We're going over right now, so we're going to take a very quick. This is the last thing we're going to look at. We're going to take a very quick look at this example. So, and this is what I'm talking about. Sam and Janet's house, living room day. Sam stares at the brand new living room furniture, still with the tags on. Janet sits on the sofa, caressing the fabric. Sam, what did this cost anyway? Janet stares at him. You don't know? Now, this line could be said a number of different ways. How do you hear what Janet says? And how do you express what Janet says? In this example, I think surprised. You don't know? We went to the store, we picked out the furniture, we bought the furniture, and you don't know what it costs? Another way Janet might express herself in this example would be, you don't know. That's an entirely different vibe with the same words. And there could be a number of different versions of that. You don't know. We could go back to, you don't know. You get the idea. You have at your disposal commas, periods, double dashes, ellipses. You have a number of ways to express on the page what you want. You could even do, you don't know. You get the idea. Look at what you say. Look at how you say it. Ask yourself in your rewrite process, ask yourself, what is it? How do I want my audience to hear this line? How do I write it so they hear what I hear? Okay, that's it. We're going to open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. Boy, it's like drinking from a fire hose. So much really good stuff. And for me, who is not a screenwriter, I'm making the parallels to writing prose, and it's the same stuff.
It's the
It's
same
couched
stuff.
differently, but it is the same stuff. And I think you and I had that discussion after one of our first get-togethers. But
Yeah.
we have a comment in the chat. And Wes, do you want to say something, or do you want me to read it, or you just want to leave it there?
Well, I just express my gratitude to Greg. I'm essentially saying the same thing that you said, Jim. I probably will never write a screenplay. I don't know, but I'm learning a lot of wonderful material for writing in general, articles, short stories, whatever. But it's just a wealth of information. I thank you so very much.
Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, you're right. 15 years, I write novels as well. And the longer I taught writing television, the more I thought, this is all the same. This all works the same. Anyway.
Tracy, did you want to say something? You verbally, you typed it?
I did. I just wanted to add a comment for the speaker, but my computer's not cooperating today for my video. But yes, that was great. I wrote down all those points you said about editing because I think that's going to be helpful for any kind of work, especially. Yeah. Thank you.
Jim will probably tell you all this. He's recorded this, so if you want to go back and look at it again, there will be you'll be able to do that.
Right. Yeah, we should be able to do that. What I thought was kind of interesting is the way you talked about the two options in the very beginning of writing it straight through, or the two steps forward and one step back. And what it reminded me is the choice of how do you write when you're doing prose and you got a critique group.
Yes.
A method would be to write the entire document out, take it to your critique group, and then make changes along the way. I like to, it's harder, but I like to take the critique group work in progress and then adjust to it, which would be the same as the studio executive saying, we need some more of this and some more of that. And then you may have to go back and do some rewriting, but at least the new stuff will be more in tune of what you think the correct answer is. And I can't imagine working with an 8-week timeline and having to get something. My goodness, that's the screenplay software that you mentioned that could take Fred's dialogue and simply extract that. That's that would be a very useful tool if we could figure out how to do that for prose, because so often you don't put the name of the speaker. And it's really hard to do. You literally has anybody ever tried to do that? Extract all of the dialogue for one particular character so that you could standardize it throughout?
You can, you're right. If there's not an attribution, then it doesn't work. But you can just say, show me everywhere where we have Fred. And unfortunately, that's going to show you where Fred appears in an action line as well as in dialogue. So
Yeah, I haven't figured out a way to do that. That's why I was asking if anybody's figured out a good way to do that. The only way I know is to literally go line by line and highlight and do it electronically.
well,
And then, okay, so Jackie is raising her hand, so maybe that means that she's got an answer. What do you think, Jackie?
No, I don't know how to do that.
Oh, you know, okay.
I had another question,
All right.
but
Well,
I don't
go
want to
ahead.
get off the subject if other people
No,
have
no,
an
no,
answer.
no, go ahead.
Greg, have you ever turned one of your screenplays into a novel?
I've turned all of my screenplays into novels. I have. I wrote my first screenplay was optioned by 2 different studios, had 3 different directors attached. I had meetings at the Polo Lounge. I had meetings in the Malibu, colony. The movie never got made. But once the rights came back to me, I thought I'm going to write because it had been through more than one rewrite, and part of it I hated. And I thought, I'm going to write the novel version because then nobody can mess with that. And that was my first novel. But most of my pilots also have versions for either television or movies. Yeah. And most of my screenplays have novels. Yeah. Yeah.
And have you done the opposite? Have you turned your novels into screenplays?
Yes. Yes. The novel, I'll just do a short version. I'll skip all the details. I have a YA sci-fi novel that I've also written a screenplay for. And I'm conscious that it might make a better TV show, and I would go back and write the first hour of. I have not done both. I have not done both a screenplay and a pilot. But yeah.
Have you ever taught a class on turning a novel into a screenplay?
I have not. I don't know if UCLA has a class like that. They might by now. They might.
Southwest Writers is looking for that. We have a lot of novel writers who think their novels could be screenplays and think that's an easy project. So we've been looking for somebody to teach that class.
Take a look. Just go to the UCLA Writers Extension program and look at that. There will be 100, probably at least every quarter, 100 courses offered. See if that's one of them. Carol, I think you had a question. Carol, you're muted.
Yes. Okay, so when I have a character, like my main character is Carissa, and she's 19, should I put her age in parentheses, or should I put comma 19? Also, some of my characters are like GIs in their 20s. How do I express age so make it easy to find an actor or actress?
First, be specific. Don't say 20s, say 23. And either would be acceptable. You just want to be consistent. Either Carol, parentheses 19. There's actually 3 ways you can do this. Carol, comma, 19, comma, beautiful, ethereal, a bit naive, comma, walks into the room. That's one way. Carol, parentheses, the 19 is in parentheses and the rest of the description is afterwards, or the entire description could be in parentheses. All 3, any of the 3 would be acceptable, but you want to be consistent with every character, regardless of what you do. You just want to make it consistent with every character.
Okay, and then could you just say like the elderly landlady, or do we have to stick an age on her?
No. Again, elderly landlady suggests this is somebody we may never see again. If it's somebody who's going to be important, the more information you give us, the more important we know that character is. The less information you give us, the more we realize that character, like the waiter, we're never going to see him. Elderly landlady gives her a key, and we never see her again. That's all you need to say about it. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good way to look at it. Okay, I'm gonna go back and make some more changes on my screen before anybody else reads it. Okay, and
All right. Any other questions? And if not, I think we'll end the recording here. If I can figure out what button to push, let's see. Pause, stop recording, stop recording. I want to stop recording.